History tends to remember the crowned. It preserves the conqueror, the dynasty, the palace wall, the boastful inscription carved in the language of power. But deep in South Asia, between roughly 2600 BC and 1900 BC, a civilization rose that built scale without leaving behind the usual fingerprints of kingship. No triumphant royal archive, no deciphered proclamation of divine rule, no obvious imperial monument shouting, "I am the state." And yet, across the floodplains and trade corridors of the ancient Indus world, order appeared. Vast, disciplined, and strangely anonymous. That is the paradox at the center of this civilization. The Indus Valley was not a loose scattering of villages waiting to become history. It was an interconnected urban system, one of the most sophisticated in the ancient world. Harappa and Mohenjo-daro stand as its famous giants, but they were only the most visible nodes in a much larger web. Dhalavira, Lothal, Kalibangan, Rakhigarhi, and dozens of smaller settlements formed a civilizational network stretching across a huge landscape. This was not one city with satellites. It was a world of cities, towns, workshops, and transit points linked by shared standards, shared habits, and shared trust. To understand the Indus, geography must be understood first. And in this case, geography was both destiny and danger. The river system of the Indus and its tributaries offered abundance, but only if floods, seasonal rhythms, and monsoon patterns could be interpreted correctly and converted into stable surplus. In ancient civilizations, water was never merely water. It was administration. It was timing. It was risk. It was political legitimacy. Control the flow of food and control the city. Fail to manage it and the whole social order begins to wobble. That is why this civilization mattered so much strategically. The Indus world sat at a hinge between inland resource zones and maritime exchange. It had access to agricultural production, raw materials, and long-distance routes reaching outward to Afghanistan, Oman, and Mesopotamia. It was not isolated. It was connected, dangerously, profitably, and permanently. The settlements were positioned where rivers, fields, workshops, and trade corridors could reinforce one another. In the ancient world, connectivity created power, but it also created dependency. A network can generate wealth only so long as the network remains intact. And the Indus world did something astonishing with that network. It standardized it. Archaeologists keep finding the same basic signatures again and again. Baked bricks in consistent proportions, standardized weights, common measures, carefully laid street grids, regulated drainage systems, seal impressions, and craft traditions that appear disciplined rather than chaotic. That is the central clue. This civilization did not merely grow, it coordinated. Somewhere, somehow, thousands of decisions were being made in ways that produced recognizable order over enormous distances. A potter in one city, a merchant in another, a builder in a third, all seem to have operated within a shared civilizational grammar. That is what makes the Indus so intellectually gripping. The evidence screams organization, but it refuses to name the organizer. In Mesopotamia, kings left noise behind them. They wrote victories into clay and stone. They advertised conquests, piety, and lineage. Their archives can be arrogant, even theatrical, but they are useful because they expose the structure of power. The Indus world does not offer that luxury. There is no deciphered bilingual text comparable to the Rosetta Stone. The script remains unreadable. This political theology remains hidden. No clear royal annals have emerged to explain who directed this machine, or whether anyone did in the centralized, imperial sense familiar from later civilizations. That silence is not emptiness. It is a form of historical resistance. And yet, silence does not mean primitive. On the contrary, the deeper one looks, the more deliberate the system appears. The roots of this civilization reach back into earlier settlement layers and agricultural communities such as Murgar, where long before the great urban phase, people were already experimenting with domestication, craft production, and durable village life. Civilizations do not suddenly appear fully formed. They accumulate habits. They train generations into complexity. Murgar matters because it shows that the Indus world was not a miracle dropped from the sky, but the culmination of centuries of social engineering, ecological adaptation, and economic learning. By the mature urban period, that learning had become visible everywhere. Mohenjo-daro and Harappa were flagship cities, but they were also symptoms of a larger order. Dhalavira reveals impressive water management and urban planning in a harsh environment. Lothal has long been associated with maritime exchange and a trade-oriented economy. Kalibangan and Rakhigarhi add further weight to the map, proving that this was not a local oddity, but a broad civilizational system with regional variation and shared principles. A civilization of this size does not survive on charisma alone. It survives on institutions, routines, and incentives that make cooperation more profitable than fragmentation. This is where the strategic genius of the Indus world becomes visible. In the absence of obvious imperial propaganda, authority may have operated through distributed mechanisms rather than a single throne. Merchant elites, ritual specialists, household networks, city-level institutions, and administrative traditions may all have played roles. The evidence does not permit certainty, and that uncertainty is the point. Historians are forced to reconstruct power here from material behavior rather than from declared ideology. The bricks are speaking because the kings are not. Consider what standardization actually means in practice. A shared brick ratio is not just a technical preference. It is an administrative decision repeated across builders who may never meet. Standard weights are not just useful objects. They are trust-made material. Seal use implies ownership, identity, or authorization in a world where goods move through multiple hands. Drainage systems imply civic discipline because someone had to agree that waste, water, and urban order were collective concerns rather than private ones. Street grids imply planning. Storage systems imply surplus management. Craft clusters imply specialization. Every one of these features reveals a society that had learned to solve coordination problems at scale. And coordination is the true heart of civilization. The great civilizations of the ancient world were not merely collections of people. They were answers to a brutal question. How does one organize human beings who do not personally know one another, do not trust one another by default, and still must cooperate for food, security, trade, and ritual life? The Indus answer appears to have been unusually elegant. It may have relied less on spectacle and conquest than on repeatable standards, economic integration, and civic regularity. That would explain why the settlements can look so orderly without looking imperial. Power may have been less dramatic than in Egypt or Mesopotamia, but no less real. Mesopotamian references to Maluha matter for exactly this reason. Those texts suggest that the Indus world was visible beyond its own borders as a trade partner, a source of materials, and a recognized participant in the wider Bronze Age economy. Maluha is not just a foreign name in an old tablet. It is external testimony that this civilization was tied into the diplomatic and commercial circuits of the ancient world. It was not hiding at the edge of history. It was already on the map. Trade in the Indus world was not a luxury. It was strategy. Carnelian beads, shellwork, copper, lapis lazuli, timber, and other valued goods moved across great distances, linking workshops to markets and markets to authority. Trade creates surplus, but it also creates vulnerability. The more complex the exchange network, the more important trust becomes. Standard weights, seals, and uniform production were not administrative trivia. They were the infrastructure of credibility. In a civilization stretched across rivers and routes, the wrong measure could fracture confidence just as surely as the wrong army could fracture a frontier. That is why the absence of obvious palace culture is so provocative. If this was not a kingdom in the Mesopotamian sense, then what was it? A federation? A network of city authorities? A civilization governed by merchant and ritual elites? A system of overlapping power rather than a single vertical command? The archaeological record does not yet settle the matter, and any confident answer would be premature. But the uncertainty itself reveals something profound. Complex societies do not always advertise power in the same way. Some rule through monuments, others rule through standards, and standards can be extraordinarily powerful. They make daily life predictable. They lower the cost of exchange. They allow distant settlements to behave as if they belong to one world. They create a civilizational rhythm that does not require constant coercion to function. That may be the most remarkable possibility in the Indus case. That order itself became a kind of political language. Not the language of royal self-glorification, but of reproducible coordination. Not the loud architecture of empire, but the quiet architecture of compliance. Still, the historian must remain disciplined. This is not a tale of certainty. It is a landscape of clues. The script remains undeciphered. No consensus has emerged around kings, dynasties, or state propaganda. No Rosetta-style breakthrough has opened a royal archive to view. And yet the material evidence is too structured, too consistent, too coordinated to dismiss as accidental. Something held this world together. That is the central mystery at the edge of the frame. We can see the scale. We can see the standards. We can see the trade. We can even see the shadow of a civilization that knew how to manage surplus, legitimacy, and urban life across immense distances. But who exactly ran it? By what methods? Through what balance of ritual, administration, custom, and economic discipline? Those questions remain suspended over the Indus like an unopened vault. And that is where the real story begins. Because once a civilization achieves this kind of reach without leaving a recognizable crown, the question is no longer whether it was advanced. The question is how such a system held together at all, and what happened to the world when that invisible architecture of order began to strain. If the Indus world looked like order from a distance, the harder question is this: who maintained that order, and by what kind of power? That question matters because the civilization presents historians with a paradox that would have baffled the kings of Mesopotamia or the pharaohs of Egypt. It built cities but left no deciphered royal archives. It standardized bricks, weights, seals, and drainage systems, yet did not carve its rulers into stone with the obsessive vanity of later empires. It coordinated at scale, but the authority behind that coordination remains hidden behind an unread script. That silence is not a void. It is a clue. For generations, historians instinctively searched for a crown-shaped answer. A single conquering monarch, a dynastic state, a palace bureaucracy broadcasting orders from a central throne. But the archaeological record refuses to cooperate with that expectation. In the great cities of Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro, in Dhalavira and Lathal, in Kalibangan and Rakhigarhi, the evidence points not to a loudly self-advertising empire, but to a civilization that mastered coordination without leaving behind the usual theatrical symbols of kingship. There are no confirmed royal tombs on the Egyptian scale, no obvious imperial war reliefs, no readable proclamations of divine rule. Instead, there are systems. And systems, unlike statues, reveal how power actually works. The most visible sign of this power is standardization. Bricks follow consistent ratios. Weights appear in carefully controlled units. Seals recur across great distances. Urban layouts show planning, and in some places, remarkable discipline in construction. Such uniformity matters. It means someone or something could enforce rules across wide regions. Markets need trust. Trade needs common measures. Builders need accepted norms. A society that can impose consistency on its materials has solved one of the oldest political problems in human history: how to make strangers cooperate. That cooperation may have been enforced by a centralized state. It may just as plausibly have emerged from a network of urban institutions, merchant elites, ritual specialists, and household-level authority working in concert. The evidence does not allow a neat throne room drama, and that is precisely what makes the Indus world so dangerous to simplistic interpretation. Power there may have been distributed rather than vertical. Not absent, distributed. That distinction changes everything. A distributed system can be extraordinarily stable if the incentives are aligned. Merchants benefit from predictable weights and seals. Craft specialists benefit from reliable access to raw materials. Urban administrators benefit from clean drainage, regulated streets, and storage systems that reduce chaos. Ritual authorities may benefit from participating in the moral legitimacy of the city without needing a visible king to dominate every transaction. In such a world, authority does not have to announce itself with armies on parade. It can hide in procedure. And procedure is one of history's quietest forms of power. Look closely at the material clues. Seal impressions suggest controlled identity and transaction verification. A seal is not merely decoration. It is a signature, a mechanism of authorization, a way of marking ownership or origin, and perhaps a means of regulating exchange. Standardized weights do even more. They make trade measurable. They reduce disputes. They turn trust from a personal relationship into a system. That is the hidden genius of urban civilization. It substitutes repeatable rules for the fragile memory of individuals. In the Indus case, the scale of that system is what astonishes. Goods moved across enormous distances. Carnelian beads traveled from workshops that could shape and polish them into objects of status and exchange. Shell work testified to coastal and riverine connections. Copper and timber had to be acquired through wider resource networks. Lapis lazuli linked the Indus world to Afghan highlands. Trade routes reached toward Oman, through the Gulf and into Mesopotamia, where texts refer to Maluha, a foreign place or region understood as a participant in long-distance commerce. The Mesopotamians, with their own hunger for imperial record-keeping, noticed the Indus world because the Indus world mattered. That matters strategically. A civilization does not become visible to distant powers unless it controls surplus, exchange, and reliability. Maluha was not some marginal backwater drifting at the edge of history. It was integrated enough to be named, valuable enough to be traded with, and organized enough to sustain that exchange over time. Which raises a profound question. How does a civilization maintain trade at that scale without leaving a readable political ego behind? One answer is that the power was not concentrated in one crown but spread across urban nodes. Harappa may not have ruled Mohenjo-daro the way a later emperor would rule a province. Instead, these cities may have operated as coordinated centers in a shared cultural system, linked by common standards and common expectations. A merchant arriving in one city could rely on familiar weights, familiar bricks, familiar signs of regulated order. That kind of regularity lowers the cost of doing business and raises the cost of cheating. It is not empire in the Mesopotamian sense. It is something subtler, institutional trust across a civilization. Another answer is that authority rested partly in ritual and social consensus. A sacred order can stabilize a city without monumental kingship, especially if elite competition is constrained by shared norms. In that model, the people who controlled access to legitimacy may have been priests, councils, or family networks rather than openly militarized rulers. The archaeological record cannot yet tell us which of these options dominated, and prudent history must resist the temptation to fill every silence with a king. Because the silence itself may be the point. A society that does not loudly advertise kingship may have had reasons for not doing so. It may have preferred collective identity over dynastic glorification. It may have structured power in ways that made elite competition less visible. Or it may simply have lacked the sort of monumental state ideology known from the courts of the Nile and Euphrates. The comparison is illuminating precisely because Mesopotamia spent so much effort broadcasting rule. Inscriptions, royal boasts, conquests, temple dedications, divine favor. The Indus record, by contrast, feels almost anti-propagandistic. If this was a ruling class, it was a ruling class with a startlingly restrained public face. And that restraint is historically unsettling. For archaeologists, one of the great clues lies in the cities themselves. Planned streets imply forethought. Drainage systems imply regulation and maintenance. At Dalavira, water management becomes a strategic signature, revealing a society that understood the political importance of surviving in a difficult environment. In an age where rainfall and river behavior shape survival, the ability to store, channel, and manage water was not a technical detail. It was authority made visible in stone and earth. Whoever coordinated such works controlled more than labor. They controlled resilience. Lothal, often discussed as a site tied to maritime exchange, adds another layer to the puzzle. A city oriented toward trade does not merely accumulate goods. It brokers relationships. It becomes a hinge between inland production and external demand. Trade-oriented sites are political instruments as much as economic ones. They turn geography into leverage. So the Indus world may have been governed not by one empire, but by a mesh of cities that disciplined commerce, labor, and construction through shared standards and local administration. That model would be less flamboyant than kingship, but not less powerful. In some ways, it is more impressive, because it depends less on the charisma of one ruler and more on the internal coherence of a civilization. Still, every system leaves traces of friction. Craft clusters and workshop evidence show specialization, and specialization always implies coordination. Someone had to ensure raw materials arrived where they were needed. Someone had to distribute finished goods. Someone had to keep standards from fragmenting as they passed from workshop to market to storage. These are not ornamental details. They are the bloodstream of urban order. A city without administration is just a crowd. A city with administration becomes a machine. But machinery can be built in different ways. The Indus machine appears to have run without the loud engine of militarized kingship. There is little evidence for a ruling ideology drenched in conquest. There is no clear record of a royal bureaucracy boasting of victories over neighbors. There is no universally accepted reading of the script to tell us what the ruling class thought of itself. That absence is not a failure of history. It is a historical condition. One of the largest urban civilizations of the ancient world has handed posterity a ledger, not a confession. And that is why the detective work matters. For every claim about power, the evidence forces a strategic interpretation. Standardization tells us that coordination existed. Seals suggest identity and control. Trade links reveal external reach and internal surplus. Urban planning implies discipline. Yet none of these clues require a single crowned emperor. They could point to a civilization where legitimacy was spread among councils, households, merchants, and ritual authorities. A civilization where the public face of power was intentionally muted, because the system itself did the ruling. That possibility should disturb any easy assumption that history naturally trends toward empire. Human beings do not only build states through fear and spectacle. Sometimes they build order through repetition, trust, and shared practice. Sometimes the strongest power is the one that does not need to shout. And in the Indus world, that may have been the deepest secret of all. Anonymity was not weakness. It may have been a political technology. A civilization capable of coordinating bricks, weights, drains, workshops, and trade routes across such a vast landscape must have possessed formidable discipline. The real mystery is not whether power existed. It did. The mystery is what kind of power could govern so much while leaving so little narrative evidence behind. Was it a council system, merchant administration, sacred authority, a city network held together by elite consensus, or some hybrid structure that does not fit any simple category inherited from later empires? The answer remains unresolved, and that unresolved state is exactly where the story becomes most dangerous. Because if the Indus world was held together by logistics rather than by kings, then its fate will not be explained by a battlefield or a dynastic fall. It will be explained by the failure of a system. And once the machinery of coordination begins to strain, the whole civilization enters a new and far more fragile chapter. And then, slowly at first, the grand machine began to lose its coherence. For centuries, the cities of the Indus world had depended on a delicate alignment of climate, rivers, trade, and civic discipline. It was never a civilization held together by a single throne, a single battlefield victory, or a single conquering army. It was held together by repeatable conditions. Predictable monsoons, reliable waterways, exchange routes that carried goods and ideas, and urban systems capable of managing surplus with astonishing precision. That kind of order does not depend on spectacle. It depends on continuity. It depends on tomorrow behaving enough like today to make planning worthwhile. Around 1900 BC, that continuity began to fail. Not everywhere at once. Not in one neat catastrophe. The collapse was uneven, regional, and mercilessly human in its logic. This matters because the old habit of explaining the end of the Indus world with a dramatic invasion narrative is too crude to survive scrutiny. There is no confirmed evidence of a single foreign army sweeping in and erasing the civilization in one blow. There is no decisive royal inscription announcing conquest, no battlefield archive, no clear chain of destruction that would justify the old fantasy of a clean ending. What the archaeological record shows instead is far more unsettling. A network fraying under pressure. Cities emptying in some places, contracting in others, as the system that once integrated them began to weaken from within and around them. That difference matters because invasion stories are emotionally satisfying. They offer a villain, a moment, a decisive act. But systems collapse rarely resemble theater. They resemble loss of coordination. They resemble institutions that still exist in name while their practical authority leaks away. In the case of the Indus world, the great question is not who stormed the gates. The great question is why the gates no longer mattered as much as they once did. The first blow may have come from the sky and the rivers. Paleoclimate research has pointed toward changing monsoon patterns, with rainfall becoming less reliable across time. In a civilization built on the management of water, that was not a minor adjustment. It was a strategic shock. Fields that once produced surplus became harder to predict. Urban storage systems faced greater uncertainty. Food planning became more difficult. The hidden arithmetic of abundance, the calculation that allows cities to exist at scale, began to break down. Floods may have stressed settlements in some regions, while drought pressure deepened in others. Rivers themselves did not behave like fixed roads. They shifted, split, and sometimes abandoned old channels entirely. River avulsion, the sudden change of a river course, could transform a thriving corridor into a stranded landscape. A city built to manage one hydrological reality could suddenly find itself trapped inside another. That is the kind of danger states fear but rarely control. Palace can command people, cannot command a monsoon, cannot command a river to remain loyal. And in the Indus world, this instability would have struck at the foundations of urban life. Cities are not just clusters of houses. They are systems of trust. They exist because grain can arrive, labor can be organized, waste can be removed, craft production can be sustained, and authority can convince people that tomorrow will resemble today. When climate begins to behave erratically, that trust becomes harder to maintain. The city still stands, but the confidence that animates it begins to erode. People do not abandon order all at once. They first begin to doubt that order will keep paying off. Then they begin to hedge. Then they begin to move. That is how coherent systems die. Not with a single scream, but with 1,000 rational adjustments. Then came the pressure of trade. The Indus civilization had never been an isolated inland phenomenon. It was embedded in long-distance exchange networks that reached toward Mesopotamia, Oman, Afghanistan, and beyond. Mesopotamian texts mention Maluha, a reminder that this world was visible to outsiders as a major trade partner, not a mythic backwater. Through these routes moved shell, copper, lapis lazuli, timber, beads, and prestige goods that mattered not merely for luxury, but for legitimacy. Trade was not peripheral to the system. It was part of the system's bloodstream. It linked urban centers to distant materials, and it linked elites to the authority that comes from controlling circulation. When those routes weakened, the effects were political as much as economic. If goods arrive less reliably, elite prestige shrinks. If surplus cannot be moved and converted into influence, coordination becomes harder. If merchants and administrators can no longer depend on steady flows, the incentives that supported urban density begin to change. The city ceases to be the obvious center of gravity. This is the hidden tragedy of many complex civilizations. Once the exchange network falters, power does not simply disappear. It decentralizes. And decentralization is not always collapse in the vulgar sense. Sometimes it is the migration of intelligence away from the center, the slow retreat of ambition into smaller circles, the replacement of grand coordination with local survival. That is exactly what the evidence suggests for the Indus world. Across the centuries after 1900 BC, settlements did not vanish in a single wave. They dispersed. Urban centers lost population or significance. Some communities shifted toward smaller, more regional forms of life. Other sites show continuity in craft traditions and domestic practices, but the old integrated city system no longer held everything together at scale. The great urban matrix fractured into local adaptations. Not silence everywhere, not extinction, fragmentation. That fragmentation is the real turning point. Because once the cities stop acting as the main organizers of life, standards become harder to enforce. The remarkable uniformity that had once stretched across the Indus world's standardized bricks, weights, measures, and seals becomes less visible in the later archaeological record. This does not mean chaos in a simplistic sense. It means the decline of a shared order. Local communities begin solving local problems in local ways. The old conventions persist in some places, mutate in others, and fade in still others. A civilization can survive its own decline in fragments. What it cannot survive is the loss of the mechanisms that make coherence profitable. Once the costs of coordination rise and the rewards of integration fall, the center stops feeling inevitable. And when the center stops feeling inevitable, human beings do what they have always done. They adapt downward, outward, and closer to home. This is where the collapse becomes intellectually severe. There is no need to imagine apocalypse to explain it. Systems can unravel quietly when their assumptions break. If rainfall patterns shift, if rivers move, if trade contracts, if urban elites lose leverage, then the administrative logic of the civilization weakens. The network does not need to explode. It only needs to stop being useful enough, reliable enough, and legitimate enough to keep its components bound together. The end of the Indus urban phase was not a sudden death. It was a dispersal of confidence. And confidence, in any complex society, is the invisible infrastructure on which everything else depends. That is why the older story of a conquering invader has lost so much of its explanatory power. It was seductive because it was simple. It offered a villain, a moment, a clean ending. But history, in its most important moments, rarely obeys clean endings. The mainstream scholarly picture is far more disciplined. Environmental stress, hydrological change, trade disruption, and regional adaptation all converged over time. The civilization did not need a dramatic external executioner. It was vulnerable to the slow collapse of the conditions that had made its brilliance possible in the first place. And in that sense, the Indus world was like every sophisticated order in history. Not invincible, not doomed by fate, merely dependent. Dependent on monsoon rhythms that could shift, on river systems that could wander, on long-distance exchange that could thin out, on shared standards that required continuous reinforcement, on the willingness of communities to continue believing that the urban centers were worth sustaining. Once those dependencies were compromised, the civilization's coherence began to dissolve across generations. Yet even here, the record refuses to become neat. There is continuity amid decline. Some crafts endure. Some settlements persist. Some cultural practices survive in altered forms. The world that follows is not blank. It is transformed. That matters because collapse is often imagined as an absolute ending. In reality, history more often rearranges itself. One form of life recedes, another takes its place. The problem is not that everything disappears. The problem is that the old hierarchy of organization no longer dominates. The Indus cities had once been the anchors of the civilization. In the dispersal period, they increasingly ceased to be so. That is the strategic meaning of the collapse. Not ruins for the sake of ruins, but a redistribution of human life away from the urban order that had once unified a vast landscape. The civilization did not fall like a statue shattered by one hammer stroke. It loosened, cracked, and separated under pressure. The consequences were profound. Less centralized coordination, weaker standardization, smaller political horizons, and a more regionalized society shaped by adaptation rather than integration. This is where the great irony emerges. The very sophistication of the Indus system may have made it vulnerable to slow environmental drift. A civilization that excels at managing stable conditions can struggle when stability itself becomes unreliable. The more elegant the machine, the more catastrophic its dependence on the assumptions beneath it. So the fall of the Indus world should not be remembered as a mystery solved by a single culprit. It should be remembered as a warning about coherence itself. How fragile it is. How much it depends on invisible alignments. How quickly order can become costly when the environment stops cooperating. And perhaps that is the deepest lesson hidden inside the silence of its ruins. Civilizations do not only die from violence. They can also be unmade by the gradual failure of the world they were built to inhabit. What survived, what changed, and why the silence of the Indus remains so difficult to interpret, that is where the story turns next. The great Indus world did not end with a trumpet blast, a royal funeral, or a conquering army riding in to claim the ashes. History, as it often does, became quieter than the myths would prefer. The cities thinned, the urban pattern loosened, but the land did not go blank, and the people did not vanish. That is the first truth the ruins demand. Collapse is not the same thing as extinction. The post-urban landscape of the Indus was not an emptied stage after the actors left forever. It was a rearrangement of life. People remained across the broader region. Settlements continued, though often smaller, more dispersed, and more local in their rhythms. Some crafts endured. Some domestic habits endured. Some agricultural practices endured. The great urban machine lost coherence, but human continuity proved stubborn, as it usually does. This matters because the end of an urban civilization is not always the end of the society that produced it. Historians are often tempted to confuse the disappearance of a visible order with the disappearance of a people. The archaeological record refuses that simplification. It shows continuity braided with transformation, memory without monument, inheritance without proclamation. The Indus did not evaporate into myth. It changed form until its older structure could no longer be recognized as the same political and urban order. And then there is the deeper scandal. The Indus civilization did not leave behind a confession. Mesopotamia left names. Egypt left kings. Assyria left boasts carved into stone. Every conquest turned into propaganda. The Indus left seals, weights, drains, streets, reservoirs, standardized bricks, and a script that still refuses to open its mouth. There is no Rosetta Stone waiting patiently to restore a royal autobiography. There is no deciphered bilingual tablet to identify the commanders, the rivals, the bargains, the betrayals. The civilization that built order at scale denied later ages the convenience of a neat narrative. That silence has frustrated generations of scholars, but it has also protected the Indus from cheap certainty. In the absence of a readable archive, the old habit of forcing history into the shape of a kingdom becomes dangerous. Was authority centralized or distributed? Were there councils, merchant elites, ritual specialists, or city-based administrations? Was the script a tool of governance, religion, identity, or all three? The evidence provokes the questions, but it does not yet surrender a final verdict. That is why the Indus remains so intellectually dangerous. It tempts the modern mind to fill the gaps with familiar imperial stories, and then punishes that habit by withholding confirmation. A civilization can be immensely organized without leaving the kind of written drama later historians crave. It can coordinate labor, standards, exchange, and urban life through institutions that are powerful precisely because they are not theatrically visible. Modern archaeology has only made the mystery more disciplined. Settlement studies have traced continuities and shifts across space and time. Environmental research has sharpened the role of changing rivers and monsoon instability. Genetics, especially debates surrounding Rakagari and broader South Asian ancestry, has added another layer to the conversation about population continuity and later historical identity. Yet even now, the larger picture remains incomplete. Science is not delivering a dramatic confession. It is assembling a more precise silence. That may sound unsatisfying. It is, in a sense, but it is also honest. For decades, older historical habits tried to make the Indus into a story of sudden foreign destruction, as though a civilization of cities, trade, craft, and standardization could be explained by a single invasion narrative. That model has not survived serious scrutiny. The collapse was slower, regional, uneven, and tied to systems under stress. A more mature historical picture has replaced the old melodrama. But with that correction comes a harder and more humbling reality. Some civilizations do not die because they are defeated. They dissolve because the conditions that made their coordination possible stop holding. That insight reaches far beyond the ancient subcontinent. A civilization can be highly organized without being loudly imperial. It can be sophisticated without leaving monumental self-praise. It can be rich in structure and poor in surviving explanation. The Indus world proves that power does not always need a crown to exist, and that legitimacy can be embedded in streets, standards, water systems, and habits of coordination rather than in a king's face stamped on every wall. But it also proves something more uncomfortable. Abundance does not guarantee permanence. Order does not mean invulnerability. The most impressive systems are often the most dependent on conditions they do not control. That is the modern mirror. Today's societies are no less dependent on logistics than Harappa or Mohenjo-daro ever were. Cities rely on transportation networks, energy grids, water systems, trade corridors, climate stability, and invisible institutions whose success makes them easy to ignore. People mistake continuity for inevitability because the machinery is usually hidden beneath routine. Yet the Indus teaches a harsher lesson. The smoother the system, the more catastrophic the break can become when the environment shifts faster than the institutions can adapt. This is why climate anxiety is not a modern obsession invented by nervous bureaucrats. It is an ancient strategic problem in a new costume. The Indus civilization lived and transformed in relationship to water, seasonality, and the geography of survival. When the landscape changed, the urban order could no longer coordinate itself in the same way. There is a chilling familiarity in that. Human beings build as though the environment is stable because stability is the precondition for planning. But history keeps reminding civilization that the ground beneath plan and policy is never as fixed as the builders hoped. And trade, too, has its own lesson. The Indus was not isolated. It was connected to Oman, Afghanistan, and Mesopotamia through the movement of materials, goods, and likely knowledge. That connectivity was strength, but also exposure. Interdependence creates wealth. It also creates vulnerability. When exchange falters, prestige weakens, specialization becomes harder to sustain, and the logic of urban life begins to fray. Modern economies know this intimately. Global systems generate astonishing efficiency and equally astonishing fragility. The ancient world and the modern one are not as different as they like to believe. They are separated by technology, not by human nature. And human nature is the constant in the ruins. The people of the Indus built with remarkable discipline. Their bricks were standardized. Their planning was deliberate. Their water management was sophisticated. Their production systems were organized with a degree of regularity that suggests serious social coordination, whether by institutions, norms, or both. Yet their civilization left almost no easy monument to personal glory. That absence can be read as humility, or as political anonymity, or as a deliberate cultural choice. It may even have been a kind of power in itself. A civilization so deeply organized that it did not need to shout. Or perhaps that is too neat. Perhaps the truth is Messier. Perhaps what survives are the bones of a political world that was never meant to be translated in the first place. After all, history preserves what it can, not what it should. One culture writes triumphantly on stone. Another encodes its order in practice, in standards, in architecture, in the dead weight of routine. Later ages inherit both, but only one is easily legible. The Indus civilization therefore stands as a rebuke to the arrogant assumption that the loudest societies are the most substantial. In that sense, the undeciphered script is more than an archaeological puzzle. It is a metaphor for history itself. The largest systems often leave behind the most incomplete explanations. Vast societies can vanish into partial evidence, while smaller, louder regimes preserve their vanity in exquisite detail. What survives is not always what mattered most. What can be read is not always what was most important. And so historians, like detectives in a room full of broken clues, are forced to admit the limits of certainty. That admission is not defeat. It is discipline. The Indus world asks for humility from anyone who tries to master it. It refuses to become a simple morality tale about kings and collapse, glory and ruin. It reminds us that civilization is not a single thing but a layered achievement. Logistics, trust, adaptation, labor, trade, and the fragile agreement that tomorrow will resemble today long enough for people to plant, store, build, and govern. When that agreement breaks, the ruins remain, but the old confidence does not. And yet, even in loss, the Indus was not erased. It was translated into later forms, into regional continuities, into altered settlement patterns, into a long and complicated South Asian history that still carries questions from its earliest urban chapter. That is why this civilization matters so profoundly. Not because it gives us a tidy ending, but because it denies us one. It stands as one of history's great refusals. No confession, no monarch's final speech, no Rosetta-style miracle, only evidence that order once existed here on a scale large enough to rival the oldest imperial worlds. The verdict, then, is subtle but severe. The Indus civilization was not destroyed in a single dramatic act. It was unstitched by changing landscapes, shifting networks, and the slow failure of the conditions that had allowed urban coherence to flourish. Its true cost was not only the fading of cities, but the loss of an entire political language that might have told us how such a civilization governed itself without crowns. The modern mirror is even sharper. Every age believes its systems are natural until the day they are not. Infrastructure, climate, trade, and social trust are all forms of civilization's invisible architecture. The Indus reminds the present that a society can be brilliant in organization and still remain vulnerable to forces larger than its imagination. And so the final question is not merely what happened to the Indus. It is this: how many of the great systems of our own world are already writing their histories in a language no one has yet learned to read?